Father, to you we give our thanks, because we know that you are the one to whom we owe everything. You've given us strength, wisdom, and understanding. You've given us the privilege of reading here and studying your word. And we thank you that as we come to you, we can do so knowing that you love us because you are our Father. That you want to do what's best for us. We ask that you may be able to use the time and the talent that you have given us to glorify yourself. And may your Spirit guide us in all that we do. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, today we want to discuss the period of the Judges, and this will be the last section that you will be responsible for the first exam. We will have another lecture on Thursday, and I'll go on with the development of the monarchy, but you will not be responsible for that on the exam. Then your exam will be a week from today, on the 25th. I'll be in California that day, if everything goes all right. So you can have all the time that you want to try to answer the question. Now there will be objective type questions on the exam, and there will also be some fill-in and some essay material. Let me give you a hint on the essay. Pretty sure you know about the covenant. Okay? There's quite a bit of material on the covenant. There's a chapter on it, and then we have discussed it in several different sections from Abraham on. In fact, there's one with Noah as well, so it's good that you know that. Now, the Judges, this is the interval between the conquest and the monarchy. After the death of Joshua, the people were turning away from God once again. God sent people to oppress them, and after a while they got tired of this and called out to God and sent it, and God sent a deliverer. The deliverer that he sent is called a judge. It has nothing whatever to do with his capability as a judicial person to settle disputes, even though in some cases it mentions that so-and-so judged Israel for so many years. And what it means is that he harassed their enemies for so many years. If the charismatic leader is raised up to free them from the oppression of others. Who is it? Any judge. There are a few that will really be in the category of judge, such as Deborah, but for the most part, they are merely a charismatic leader. To free the people from oppression. It happens in this time when Johnny was really young. He's the most charismatic among us. Now, the simple concept in the book of Judges is that things that happen to Israel are interrelated and specifically related to the acts of Yahweh. In other words, what happens to them is the intervention of Yahweh on their part. And it also teaches the truth that anybody who is yielded to Yahweh can be used by Yahweh. Yahweh tests Israel on several occasions, and in fact he said he's left some of the people in there specifically for that reason. He's not destroyed them all. Are interrelated with and specifically related to the act of Yahweh. The disobedience of the Israelites becomes the means whereby God creates a deeper experience in their lives, a deeper understanding of the election purpose, a deeper understanding of His relationship to the nation as a whole. So that He sends these things to bring them to their senses. Now, if this is the case, that God will send an oppressor so that the people will turn to Him, we should extend that and say that there are times when God brings things on us to draw us closer to Himself. During this period of the Judges, there are a lot of people moving around. There are migrations of people. This is in the last part of the first millennium. We have the sea peoples on the move. We have the Hittites on the move. The Hurrians are moving. In fact, there's a sort of a chain reaction as a result of the Greek peoples who move over into Asia Minor and come down the coast. They destroy the Hittite Empire as such. The Hittites move to the east. They displace the Hurrians who have been living there. The Hurrians in turn displace another people, and so you have chaos all over the Middle East at this particular period. You have the Israelites who are doing the same thing. The Israelites have come in and are trying to displace the native inhabitants, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, the Hippites, and all of those who were living in the land. So you have a lot of fluidity among ethnic groups at this particular time. It's sometimes thought of as the introduction of the Iron Age. Iron usually is said to come into prominent use around 1200. Of course, it depends on the locality. It was used in Asia Minor much earlier than it was used in Canaan. But this is the introduction of the Iron Age. We have some references in the time of Saul that the people did not have weapons at all, but Jonathan, or Saul and his son Jonathan, had weapons. That may be a reference to iron weapons. They could have bronze weapons, but they are no match against iron. So this is the introduction of the Iron Age, and we'll see that on one occasion one of the judges actually makes his own weapon to use. In Canaan, we have a number of peoples. The term Canaanite can be used as a collective for all of them. Probably it means more merchant, but it is not very sharply used. It's sort of a coverall for all of the inhabitants of the area. And then we have Hittites. We saw earlier that Abraham bought the field of Machpelah from Ephron, the Hittites. Those people are still in the area. We have Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. In fact, they are called 7 nations, greater and stronger than you. which also gives us some pause to think. If we have 7 nations who are inhabiting Canaan at this time, the Israelites are coming in from the outside, and God makes the statement, I dislodged 7 nations greater and stronger than you. And just how big is Israel? We talked about that 600,000 fighting men, 3 million people coming in. Well, if each of these 7 nations are bigger and stronger, that means we have over 25 million people living in an area which today has 4.5 million. So that sort of thing is what causes us to wonder about the use of these figures. They dispossessed one at one time. Well, they are mentioned as being there all at the same time. Or may mean that collectively they are more numerous and stronger, rather than each one is more numerous and stronger. The tribes are not united on most occasions. We think of the 12 tribes of Israel coming in as a unit under the leadership of Joshua. They're settled, though, in different parts of the country. Geography tends to tear them apart because there is not good communication with every area. Difference in customs among the tribes also tends to pull them apart. The one factor that seems to unite them is that Yahweh is their God. Some have described it even as an amphictyony. My major professor, Cyrus Gordon, probably would like to wash out my mouth. I use that term. He didn't like it at all. But an amphictyony is where you have a loose-knit group of people, various tribes, that are united for one purpose only, and that is for the worship of their God. So you have a central shrine where they worship, but other than that, politically, ethnically, they can be different. Amphictyony.
Now you have to use the right.
Amphictyony. The Greeks use this, where you have a central government for some aspects of their life, but otherwise they are divided into groups. Really should have brought the map in today to illustrate this. When we take a look at the judges, we see that they are in different parts of the country, and they may be contemporaries. There is a tendency to treat them chronologically and speak of 300-year period for covering the judges, because you add up the number of years that Ehud was the judge, and then the number of years that Gideon was the judge, and adding them all together makes a long period of time. But they may not be all operating consecutively. They may be simultaneous. And I'd like to illustrate that for you today. We do not have any idea who wrote the book of Judges. There's no indication. It looks like there were several different accounts that may have been given orally in the 12th to 10th century and then put into writing perhaps as early as the 10th to the 9th, 10th century.
The theology of the book, though, is important. There are some lessons that are taught, and these mainly are negative lessons, either taught as a negative lesson or as a contrast to what really should be done. It bears out what Deuteronomy says, that if you sin, you're going to be punished. And if you repent, you will be delivered. And the book of Judges is an illustration of this again and again. A fourfold cycle of sin, oppression, repentance, and deliverance. People sin, God sends an oppressor. They repent, and He sends a judge. So that fourfold cycle is repeated again and again. Sin, oppression, repentance, and deliverance. I should try to find 4 words that are alliteration there, so you could use that in the sermon. I can do that. Another religious significance, I guess, that we can see in this is sin, or not sin in general, deceit and treachery. It serves your purpose, which is very much like the Greek idea. I remember one of the passages in the Odyssey where the Iliad rather, where they catch one of the enemy and they tell him, "You give us the information that you want and we'll let you go free." So he gives them the information and they kill him. Now that's clever, to be able to get the information from a person like that. And that's the type of cleverness that we're talking about in the Judges, especially with Ehud and Yael. They are doing what they think is right. And I don't know if it's a practice that we should follow. Another one that we can learn from negatively is Japheth. He is the one who makes the oath that he will sacrifice whatever comes out of his house, happens to be his daughter. We can learn not to do that from what Japheth did. I don't know if we can learn anything from Samson. About the only thing that there is that God works through Samson, and what he does is directly the will of God. Even though he does some things that we certainly don't condone. But the central truth in all of this is that God can use anyone who is yielded to Him. Now let's take a look at some of these people. Judges is another one of my favorite books. First of all, I want you to notice that there is much land that remains. We have the impression from the book of Joshua. Joshua led the people in. They took the city of Jericho, the city of Ai, went to Shechem, renewed the covenant, fought a battle at Gibeon, went to the north and fought a battle against Jabin, king of Hatzor. That was it. They had the entire land. Now we'll distribute it among the tribes. Oh, isn't that easy? There was a lot of territory that they had not really occupied yet. We are told that in Joshua, but it doesn't come through quite as clearly as it does in the book of Judges. And we are told that there's a lot of territory that still needs to be taken. And part of this is mentioned in the first chapter of Judges, where Judah decides that it will go and try to claim some of its land, and they ask Simeon to go with them. Basically, though, the book of Judges talks of the sin of the people and the oppression that they come under because they have forsaken Yahweh. In chapter 2, an angel has come and delivers a message. This message speaks of the covenant relationship of Yahweh to the people. And then it says, "You have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? Now therefore I tell you that I will not drive them out before you. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you." So these people now are to be thorns to the Israelites because the Israelites did not go ahead and do what they were commanded to do. And we aren't told why they didn't do it. It's just that they had failed to obey the commands of God. In verse 10, chapter 2, after that whole generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They provoked the Lord to anger, because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord handed them over to raiders who plundered them. In verse 16, then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of their raiders. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. Chapter 3 tells us the names of the nations that God left in the land to test the Israelites. We have in verse 3 the 5 rulers of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites living in the Lebanon mountains from Mount Baal Hermon to Nebo Hamath. They were to test the Israelites to see whether they would obey the Lord's commands, which he had given their forefathers through Moses. The Israelites lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They took their daughters in marriage and gave their own daughters to their sons and served their gods. Now it looks like they are doing everything that they weren't supposed to do. Verse 7, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God, and the anger of the Lord burned against them, so he handed them over to Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram Naharaim. Now that means Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is in the midst of the river. That's the Greek word. Aram Naharaim is the land of the 2 rivers. So Mesopotamia, Aram Naharaim, same thing. This fellow oppressed them for 8 years. Then they cried out to the Lord. He raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. The Lord gave Cushan Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years, until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. We do not know where the battle took place. We just know that Cushan Rishathaim is from the north, from Mesopotamia. The other judges, most of them, we do know geographically where they operated. The next one is Ehud, and he is near Jericho. So we're talking about the tribes that are in the vicinity of Jericho. They are being oppressed by Moab, and the Ammonites and the Amalekites are helping Moab. It says in verse 14, the Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and He gave them a deliverer. Okay, we have our sin, our oppression, their repentance, and now a deliverer who is Ehud, a left-handed man, son of Gera the Benjamite. He made himself a sword, a double-edged sword. Now, this is not the type of sword that most of them were using in those days. Most of them were using what is called a sickle sword. It looks more like this. There's a handle here, and you have a cutting edge here. So you use it sort of hacking like you would an axe. But in this particular case, he makes himself a sword like this, with your handle up here, and it's a double-edged blade, which is used for plunging. Yes.
It seems to me that without the one form of most teach your children about me and all that they were basically, they weren't doing it.
That's right.
A lot of the generations, even though they knew God, and teach it to their own, to the next generation.
True. As Dr. Mayton keeps emphasizing, that the church is just one generation from extinction, for that same reason. If the next generation is not taught, the church goes out of existence. No, they don't have any evidence here of the sacrifices. It's just that people started groaning and started calling out, God help us. And God is merciful. Now, the way in which Ehud helped the people was to assassinate Eglon. That's it. He tells them that he has a secret message for him. So he sends out all of his retainers, and then Ehud takes this sword that he has constructed. The fact that he's left-handed is important, because he would draw his sword from the right side, and that then would not be detected. Usually you wore it on the left side, and if they were frisked when they went in, it would not be noticed. And so he plunges this into the belly of Eglon, and that's the message that he has for him. And he says that he didn't bother to draw it out, but the fat just closed in around the handle, and the dirt came out. Then Ehud closed the doors and locked them. So he's in a building of some kind. When his servants come back and find the door locked, they figure, well, he's gone to the restroom, we better not disturb him. And after waiting a while, they became embarrassed, and when they opened the doors, they found out that he was dead. This gives Ehud time enough to gather the forces that he needs, and they attack the Moabites, and without leadership, they are defeated. So all he has to do is get rid of the king, and then the rest of them go. He blows a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. So here we're dealing perhaps with Ephraimites, Benjamites, and perhaps some people from Judah, since they are the ones that are closest to this area of Jericho and Moab. So they're free. And the land had rest or peace for 80 years. Now, the first one was 40, now it's 80. Verse 31 has just one verse about Shamgar, son of Anak, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. He too saved Israel I'm sure there was a story about him, just like there is about Samson. But we don't have it given to us. They just mention him in passing. He is mentioned again in the Song of Deborah in chapter 5, in verse 6. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anat, in the days of Jael, the roads were abandoned. Travelers took the winding paths. That is, until I, Deborah, arose, and I took matters into my own hands and solved the problem. And the next judge, now we don't know where Shamgar is operating either. We don't know that.
So Shamgar is a judge?
Yes, he's considered a judge. He's somebody that harassed the enemy. He is dealing with Philistines, so it could be in the same territory where Samson operates later. Could be in the Jezreel Valley because there are Philistines there. All we know is he's killed 600 of them, and he did it with an ox goad. And what is an ox goad? You need to know what it is in case you have to use one. No. An ox goad. Do you use the term goad at all? You goad somebody? So what is an ox goad? A pointed stick that you use to prod the ox to make him go. And it may have had a metal point on the end of it. And this is what Shamgar used. He used it as a spear, probably, and thrust these Philistines through. But he saved Israel, it says. Now that we have, after Ehud died, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So in this particular case, it looks like this event is after Ehud. That is chronologically after. Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hatzor, is oppressing the people. They're in the north. Now Deborah, who is prophetess, in verse 4, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided. Now she is the only one that specifically it mentions that she's deciding cases. So she is what we would call a judge. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali. So he's from the north. And she says, the Lord wants you to go against Sisera. Verse 8, Barak said to her, if you go with me, I will go. How? But if you don't go with me, I won't go. So she says, I'll go. So she accompanied them into battle. Barak is able to defeat the forces of Sisera because God fought for them. The forces of Barak were on Mount Tabor, and they come barreling down a hill, and forces of Sisera are in the valley of Jezreel. That's where chariots operate, not in hill country, but in the plains. Their wheels are bogged down because of the overflow of the Kishon River. Most of the time the Kishon is a drainage ditch. It drains the Jezreel. But in times of rain, it can be a torrent and it spreads out and floods the whole area. Chariots do not work well in mud. And so they're bogged down, their soldiers are heavily armed, and they cannot maneuver. So the Israelites are able to defeat them. Sisera, the general, fled on foot to the tent of Jael. Verse 17. It says, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there were friendly relations between Jabin king of Hatzor and the clan of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid. So he entered her tent and she put a covering over him. I'm thirsty, he said. Please give me some water. She opened the skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. Short of water? He wanted water. Why did she give him milk? Make him sleep. And when he has drunk and is asleep, she takes a tent peg in one hand and the mallet in the other hand and drives the tent peg through his skull. Come in. Come in. Now, this had been predicted by Deborah. When Barak said, if you won't go with me, I won't go, Deborah had said, okay, I'll go with you, but the victory will be to a woman. So Yael gets the victory rather than Barak. There's also a poetic section for this. Chapter 5 is the poetic rendition of the battle. And it's in the poetic section that you can see really what happened. In verse 20, from the heavens the stars fought. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The river Kishon swept them away, the age-old river, the river Kishon. March on, my soul, be strong. And they mentioned there that there is participation of the heavenly elements in this. That is, God has intervened on the part of Israel. And then also later when she gets Sisera, verses 24 through 27, is a favorite passage of mine. Most blessed of women be Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of tent-dwelling women. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. In a bowl fit for nobles, she brought him curdled milk. Her hand reached for the tent peg, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank. He fell. There he lay. At her feet he sank. He fell. Where he sank, there he fell. Dead. Beautiful. And the land had peace 40 years. Okay, 40 years, 80 years, 40 years. Gideon. Gideon is one that we give a lot of credit to, but he really didn't show much faith. He has to be convinced too many times. There's first of all an angel that appears to him while he's threshing out grain in the olive press to keep from being pound, or the wine press, I forget which one it is. The Bedouin were coming in from the east, Midianites, Amalekites, other eastern peoples. They invaded the country. Now this may have been a result of the previous battle. When Sisera is killed and his army is defeated, this creates a vacuum in that area, which is the Jezreel Valley. These people now from the east are coming in to that same Jezreel Valley and then making their way down through Canaan and to Gaza, taking everything that they find. They come in at harvest time, and they take all the food that they can find, and then they go back across the Jordan. Now this has been going on for some time. 7 years. Verse 4, chapter 6, they camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. So God calls Gideon to do something about it. And Gideon says, I can't. You find the conversation in verse 12, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon. He said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. But, sir, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Verse 14, the Lord turned to him and said, notice the angel of the Lord came in verse 11. In verse 14, the Lord turned to him. You cannot make a distinction between the angel of the Lord and the Lord. They are used interchangeably, and they shift back and forth quickly. The Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? But Lord, Gideon asked, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Well, if you go down a little bit, when he tears down the altar of Baal, he does so with the help of 10 of his servants. Now, that's not a very weak person, in my estimation, and not very low on the totem pole socially, if he can take 10 servants with him. So it's not a very good excuse that Gideon gives. Then Gideon is told that he is to go after the Midianites, but he wants to be sure. And so he puts out a fleece. Verse 36, if you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand as you said. And next morning he squeezed out a whole bowl full of water. Now that could be just coincidence. Try putting a piece of tar paper or something like that on a garage floor. And you find that it absorbs moisture, and underneath it'll be all wet. See, so maybe that's just coincidence. So Gideon says, okay, let's try it again, only reverse it. And everything else be wet, but the fleece be dry. So God accommodates him, and this happens. So now he's all set, isn't he? He has his miracle, his reverse miracle, and he knows that God is with him. Well, no, he doesn't yet. He gathers all the men. There are 32,000 who come to fight. And God says, too many. Send everyone home that doesn't want to fight or who's afraid. So 22,000 left. That left him with 10,000. Still too many. So he tells him to take them down to the water and have them drink. Oh, we have a problem. In chapter 7, verse 5, Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel down to drink. 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. See any difficulty there? These 300 lapped with their hands to their mouth. Right? How? Like that? Yeah, we had a dog that always drank that way too. She would take her paw, and no, not really. I've never seen a dog drink that way. And it's those who laugh like a dog, it says. Isn't it? Now, they always put their face right down in the water. And so those who are laughing must have their face right down in the water too, even if they use their hand to their mouth. So they can't be looking around, can they? Doesn't that ruin a good sermon?
Well, there's a difference, because the other, I guess, 7,700 men were on 2 knees. I mean, they just slapped themselves.
No, they just said they kneel down to drink.
Yeah, but they were on both knees.
Okay, both knees. That's all right. But those who laugh like a dog are the ones who are chosen.
With their hand. The Bible says with their hand.
With the 300 men that laughed, I will save you. And we had the laughing like a dog.
No.
They laughed out of their hand.
Yeah, here it says by hand. No, it's
Like a dog.
Right.
Like a dog laughs.
Now, a dog doesn't laugh out of his hand, but let's just think of that part.
Right.
Well, there were 300 of these people chosen. Yes.
I think we already told you this is what it is. 300 men laughed at their hands.
Mm-hmm.
And then before it says laugh like a dog.
Laugh like a dog. That's why I say our dog always laughs that way. Oh, there are 300 of them. And that's your army, Gideon. 300. Now Gideon's all set. No. He still isn't sure. I had a dream, saying, a round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. Now that was enough. That did it. These guys probably didn't know what they were saying. That's the interpretation of a dream, and this is Gideon. It helps Gideon. Now that's the whole purpose of this. It's for Gideon. It isn't for them. So he divides the men into 3 companies, 100 each. He gives them trumpets, torches, pitchers. The pitchers are for hiding the torch, and then when they are all encircled around the camp, they break the jars and blow the trumpets and probably throw the torches into the camp of the Midianites. There is utter confusion, and the Midianites, the Amalekites, start fighting among one another. Gideon pursues them and is able to conquer this people. But he has trouble with one of the tribes of Israel. That's Ephraim. Ephraim wants to know, how come we weren't called out to the battle? And notice that when they asked this question, Gideon had won. That's the best time to ask a question like this. And Gideon is very diplomatic and says, well, what you did was much greater than what I did, because they had participated later when the Midianites started to flee, and they had captured a couple of the leaders of these people. So he gets out of it all right, no problem. Now, Gideon I do not understand. He refuses to rule over the people, but then he asks one request. Chapter 8, verse 24. I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder. It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. And those who wear gold earrings today are Ishmaelites. They answered, we'll be glad to give them. So they spread out a garment, and each man threw a ring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels, 43 pounds, according to the note. And then he made this into an ephod. And he placed it in Ophrah, his town. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. What is Gideon doing? The Lord has just given him this great victory, and he turns around and makes an ephod, and the people start worshiping. As soon as Gideon dies, the people are off doing their old things again, and Abimelech is raised up. Abimelech is a son of Gideon, however, not by one of his legitimate wives, but by a prostitute, in Shechem. He goes to the people of Shechem and has them kill all the legitimate sons of Gideon, 70 of them, and he becomes king. Well, it turns out that Abimelech gets his in the end when the city of Shechem sides against him. He destroys the city of Shechem and then has gone to another town to besiege it. The citizens of Shechem went into the fortified temple, and Abimelech gathered brush and put it against the tower and set it on fire, so he destroyed it all. But he goes to another town, and he is going to try the same thing. Sebed, verse 50. But there's a woman at the top of the tower, and she drops an upper millstone on his head, cracks his skull. So he tells his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me," so that they can't say a woman killed him. So his servant ran him through, and he died. And then when he's dead, then everybody goes home. The battle's over. So Abimelech is a renegade son of Gideon. Then you have several little guys mentioned. Tola, son of Pua. He led Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried in Shamir. Doesn't say anything about him. And then Jair of Gilead, he led Israel 22 years. He had 30 sons. They rode 30 donkeys. Quite an accomplishment. They controlled 30 towns in Gilead. Then we have Jephthah. Wait a minute, maybe I made a mistake on Abimelech. If he was legitimate or not. Well, it doesn't say. As I think that point I got mixed up with Jephthah, who is the next one, who is the son of a prostitute. Gilead is his father, but his mother was a prostitute. He also was called to lead the people of Israel in their fight against the Ammonites. And the Ammonites, again, are in Transjordan. So that's where Gideon fought. Now, Jephthah also is called to fight in that same area. After his victory, again the men of Ephraim came to find out why it was that they were not called to help. He does not get out of it like Gideon did. He's not the diplomat. So there's a civil war that takes place between Jephthah and the tribe of Ephraim. Jephthah is defeating them, and many of them are caught on the east side of the Jordan River. When they try to get back, they have to go over the fords. The men of Jephthah are there to see if they are Ephraimites or not. And it says that they asked them if they are Ephraimites. If he replied no, they said, all right, say Shibboleth. If he said Sibboleth, this is in chapter 12, verse 6. If he said Sibboleth, because he could not pronounce the word correctly, they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at that time. This shows dialectical differences between the people of Jephthah and the Ephraimites. Because the Ephraimites could not pronounce the sheen in Hebrew. It's Shibboleth rather than Sibboleth. The dialectical differences. See, we could do that too in America. All we have to do is ask a person from Boston to say Harvard, and we'd have them all. Or ask them to say Cuba, and we'd have them all. If you ever heard JFK speak during the Cuba crisis, you know where he got the R on Cuba?
From the cross.
He took it from Harvard. But we have all kinds of dialectical differences in the U.S., and there are some experts who can tell within about 25 miles of where you live just by listening to you talk. So we have all kinds of dialectical differences. Except some of us, general Americans. Samson. What can I say about Samson? You've seen it. Samson and Delilah. There's nothing that I can say to correct your impression of what has happened in this man's life. Samson's mother has no children. She is sterile and childless. And then it says an angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You're going to have a son." And remember this motif, so frequent in the Old Testament. So his mother is going to have a child, but he's going to be a special child. A Nazarite, right from the start. He's not to eat any grapes, drink any grape juice. He's not to cut his hair. When the child is born, they raise him just as the angel has told them. And then when he grows to manhood, he starts getting into trouble. Chapter 14, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." They want to know, isn't there an Israelite woman? And no, he wants this one. Because the text says that this was the way that God had for finding a quarrel with the Philistines. So they go down to Timnah to make the arrangements, and on the way he meets the lion which he kills. Later, when they go down for the marriage ceremony, he happens to pass that same way and checks on the carcass and finds a hive of bees in the carcass of the lion. This gives him a riddle. What is sweeter than honey? What is strong? Or whoops, that's the answer. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. And at his wedding, he proposes this riddle to the 30 men who are his companions. Part of the custom of the Philistines. If they can guess the riddle, he will give each of them a new set of clothes. And if they cannot, then they each must give him a set of clothes. So he uses, or they use his wife to finally get the information. She cries all week. What a honeymoon. Cries all week, saying that you haven't trusted me. Why haven't you told me the answer to the riddle? As soon as she finds out, she tells these guys, and they tell Samson. And he replies, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." So he goes down to Ashkelon, which is near the seacoast, kills 30 Philistines, takes their clothes away from them, and brings them back to these 30 people. Okay, so you have 30 Philistines who are killed on this occasion, and so he can pay for the riddle. But notice in verse 19 of chapter 14, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. He went down to Ashkelon. And so we have the Spirit of the Lord directing him in this. Later on, at wheat harvest time, Samson goes to visit his wife. He finds out that she's been given to another man. Now this is what is called an Arabu marriage. It's a technical term that is used in Akkadian for the wife staying in the home of her father and their husband visiting her from time to time. Her father had thought that Samson didn't like her anymore, so he had given her away to somebody else. Samson becomes angry, so he catches several little beasts. Generally they're said to be foxes. They may be different types of animals. And he ties their tails together and sets them loose with the tails burning in the grain. So it burns up the fields of the Philistines. So the Philistines then come after Samson. His own people agree to turn him over to them, and he agrees to it as long as they themselves do not take action against Samson. So as soon as he's turned over to the Philistines, he breaks his bond and kills 1,000 of them with the jawbone of a donkey. Then you have Samson and Delilah, a most pathetic case. I don't know that there is anybody in the Bible who is more stupid than Samson. Where every time that he gives her a reason for his strength, she tries it out. Why wouldn't a guy like this catch on? I doubt that he's in love. He might be infatuated with her. As a result of this, notice in the encounter between Samson and Delilah that he gets closer and closer to the truth each time. And then finally he does reveal to her his hair. So hair is cut, he is then blinded and put to death grinding grain in prison. But then you know the end where he pulls the temple down. They have excavated a temple in Tel in Israel, which is based on the same structure. There are two central pillars in the middle of the temple. Of course, it's not nearly as big as what we have described here, because here we have several thousand people who are in the temple and on the roof of the temple. The temple of Tel is a small little thing. You probably couldn't get 100 people in if you crammed them. But it does have that same architecture where the two central pillars that hold up the building, and they are close enough together that you can touch both. So it's very similar to what is described here. Yes?
Drink wine, put it there, and by drinking wine and listening to the women, he goes to Nazareth out there.
Does he drink wine?
And they say he drinks wine at the good way.
I don't know that it says that in there. Now, does a Nazarite to avoid women? Now, is that true for a Nazarite? Or that they just don't take wine and they don't cut their hair? He's not priest. The priest would have restrictions on him, but I don't know that Nazarite would be required to restrict himself. Now, if you think that Samson is sick, read the last two sections. It gets worse. There is a section that talks about the Danites moving from their territory near the Philistines and Shephelah to the north. And it becomes the northernmost part of Israel, Dan. There is a young man who overhears his mother utter a curse about the money that has been stolen. And he confesses that he's the one who stole money. So to counteract the curse, she then pronounces a blessing on him. And when she gets the money back, she gives him part of it to have an idol made. A shrine is set up in the home. Later, the Danites come through and convince the priest who is officiating there it would be much better for him to be a priest for a tribe rather than for just a family. So he goes with them, stealing all of the household items, the religious items of Micah's. And this then is set up as a shrine in Dan, and it indicates that this was the religious center until the people went into exile from Dan. In chapter 18, verse 30, there the Danites set up for themselves the idols, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. They continued to use the idols Micah had made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. The idea in Judges, every man did what was right in his own eyes. There was no king in Israel. And you see that again and again. The last item is a Levite from the hill country of Ephraim who goes to Bethlehem to get his concubine back. Looks like she left him, went home to her father. Now he's going to get her back. Each time he wants to leave, since his father is willing to get rid of his daughter, but he wants him to have a little fellowship before he leaves, he spends several days, day after day, doing the same thing. He'd start eating and drinking with his father-in-law, and then it was too late in the day to start. So finally they decided they would go anyway one afternoon, late, but they weren't able to go very far before darkness overtook them. They passed, if you go from Bethlehem, it's only about 4 or 5 miles to Jerusalem. But Jerusalem is a foreign city. They don't want to stop there. They go on to Geba or Gibeah, one of those. And they first come to Gibeah of Saul, which is another 4 or 5 miles to the north. And they go into Gibeah, and there we find homosexuals. Where an old man who is living in Gibeah, who's not a Gibeonite, or not a, I shouldn't say Gibeonite, that sounds like from Gibeon. He's not an inhabitant of Gibeah. He's not from the tribe of Benjamin. He takes them into his house. And when the men of the city find that they're there, they come around wanting to have sex with him. And you see this in chapter 19, verse 22, the last part of it. Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him. The owner of the house went outside and said to him, No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this disgraceful thing. Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now. You can use them and do to them whatever you wish. But to this man, don't do such a disgraceful thing. So he's willing to give his daughter to protect his guest. Now that is the law of hospitality. But here we have these vile people who are living in Gibeah, and they molest this concubine till in the morning she's dead. So this Levite takes her home, cuts her up into pieces, and sends her throughout Israel, telling what has happened. So Israel comes to punish the men at Gibeah. But the Benjamites won't allow them to take those who were guilty. And there's civil war. Benjamin wins in the first couple of battles that are fought, but then finally the people of Israel prevail, and almost the whole tribe of Benjamin is wiped out. There are only 400 men, or 600 men that escape. After they sit down and think about it, they wonder, well, what are we going to do now? Because the tribe is decimated. We've got to rebuild this tribe. But they've taken an oath. None of us will give his daughter to the Benjamites. So you have 600 men, they have no wives, so how are you going to populate the tribe again? Well, they take a census, they find out people from Jabesh Gilead didn't come to battle. Now, Jabesh Gilead is that same site that Saul is going to defend. They send to Jabesh Gilead, wipe out the inhabitants, bring back all eligible girls, and there are 400 of them, and they give them to 400 of these 600 men. The other 200 are told, look, we have this festival every day at Shiloh, or every year rather, and the girls go out to dance. So you lie in wait, and when the girls come out to dance, each of you grab one. Then we can say to the parents, look, we didn't give you the daughters, you took them. So that will take care of that. And so we have then the men who are left from the tribe of Benjamin have wives, and the tribe is built up again. Now keep that in mind. Jabesh Gilead and the people of Benjamin. Because when we take a look at Saul, the first official act as king is to defend Jabesh Gilead. Saul's own grandmother may have come from Jabesh Gilead. Yes. Yes, Lot of Sodom and Gomorrah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you have this practice several times in Israel.
Old Testament.
In the Old Testament. And in the New Testament too.